Hey guys, tonight we dive into one of the strangest, sleepiest tales history has to offer. When Victorian London, in all its gaslit glory, tried to ban yawning in public. You step out onto a mist-slicked cobblestone street, the air thick with chimney soot and damp fog, the kind that clings to your coat and soul. A horse-drawn omnibus clatters past. A lamplighter flicks his pole skyward. Somewhere, a drunk bellows a sea shanty in E-flat. And you? You stifle a yawn. Too late. A passing matron in 30 pounds of taffeta glares at you like you've kicked a puppy and sworn in church. You're not tired, of course, not really. It's just that everything in this city is designed to lull your brain into a mild coma. And now, thanks to some deeply dramatic Victorians, even yawning might be considered a moral failure. You probably won't survive this. Not because it's dangerous, but because the absurdity may collapse your will to live. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is, especially if you're mid-yawn. I won't judge. Not like they did. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander west, where the gaslights flicker orange and carriages clack-clack over the cobbles. It's 1864, London swollen with steam, smog, and opinions. You see a tailor in a waistcoat so stiff it looks weaponized, a chimney sweep covered in soot, and a row of ladies fanning themselves despite the freezing mist. Everyone's got somewhere to be. No one looks awake. Then you feel it, a yawn creeping up the back of your throat like a well-meaning but awkward cousin at a family reunion. You try to hold it in. Too late. Your jaw drops. Eyes squint. Someone across the street mirrors you. Then another. A chain reaction. Because, weirdly, yawning is contagious. That's not just a saying, it's backed by actual science. Mirror neurons, empathy circuits, social bonding. Modern studies point to yawning as a way humans subconsciously connect. But here in Victorian London, it's just vulgar. Scandalous. Possibly French. The idea of a yawn as a shared biological impulse wouldn't fly here. Not yet. Not when society's clinging to the idea that self-control equals moral worth. You're supposed to repress everything. Your appetite, your opinions, your emotions. And yes, your yawns. Especially if you're a woman. Especially if you're unmarried. Especially if you're trying to snag a husband with both wealth and a strong jawline. You pass a newsboy hawking the Evening Standard, waving a headline about the Crimean War's aftermath, and wait, what's that subheadline? Moral degeneration in public spaces, a threat from within. You raise an eyebrow. Could be about anything. Could be about hats. But it might just be about yawning. Because lately, some very serious men in very serious coats have decided that the yawn isn't just lazy, it's contagious immorality. They don't use those words, but you can feel it in the tone. The way they talk about decorum, discipline, public shame. They've got a whole philosophy based on clenched teeth and tight corsets. And somewhere between the fog and the footmen, the absurd begins to feel almost logical. Historians still argue whether the Great Yawn Panic ever really swept the city, or if it was just an overblown ripple in a few newspaper columns. Some say the Anti-Yawn League, we'll get to them soon, was entirely satirical, a kind of inside joke that ran away from its authors. Others insist there were actual, documented cases of people being fined, even harassed, for excessive yawning in churches or public parks. But tonight, we're leaning in. Pretending it was all absolutely real. Because that makes the world funnier, stranger, and, ironically, more awake. You duck into a coffee house, the kind with polished mahogany tables and too many spoons. The place hums with murmurs, spoons clinking, and the scratch of quills. Gentlemen in top hats sip weak coffee and debate whether Prussia is getting too bold. You notice one young man stifle a yawn with the back of his gloved hand. His neighbor frowns. He notices. He frowns harder. Then someone mutters the phrase, lack of moral fiber. Oh boy. Because in this world, even the involuntary can be scrutinized. A yawn isn't just a sign you're tired, It's proof your soul is slacking. Maybe even your character. Maybe even your patriotism. You settle in near the hearth and imagine how this madness might have begun. Maybe it was one particularly stifled duchess at the opera. Maybe someone in Parliament thought yawns distracted from speeches. Maybe it was just one too many Sunday sermons where the rector's drone caused the front pew to ripple like a sleepy wave. Whatever the spark, the city's ready for it. Victorians love rules. They have separate silverware for grapefruit, book-length etiquette guides, and anxieties piled like millefeuille. In a place where it's scandalous to button your gloves too quickly, a yawn could topple empires. And to be fair, it is a bit contagious. You glance across the room. Someone yawns again. You feel a tug at your own jaw. You look away. It's spreading like gossip, soft and unstoppable. Somewhere outside, the bells of St. Martin's toll the hour, and the fog swirls thicker than before. You step back into the night, yawn still tingling in your throat, wondering if you're being watched. Maybe you are. Not by police. Not yet. But by society. The kind with lace gloves and sharp eyes and endless opinions. You quicken your pace, pulling your coat tighter. You pass a vendor selling roasted chestnuts. He yawns. You do too. A constable near the corner narrows his eyes. And just like that, you begin to suspect, this might be more than just a yawn. It might be a revolution. You keep walking, the street lamp haze melting into a theater of shadows, where everything seems suspiciously drowsy. Even the pigeons look bored. By the time you turn onto Regent Street, you realize something strange. Nobody looks fully awake. It's not just you. It's the entire city, staggering through its days like actors in a play that forgot its plot halfway through. Victorian London, after all, runs on fumes, coal fumes, tea fumes, emotional repression fumes. You're surrounded by the unholy trinity, smog, tepid beverages, and terminal tedium. No wonder everyone's yawning. It's not laziness, it's defense. You pass a group of clerks emerging from a counting house. They wear the dazed expression of people who've just had to listen to 12 straight hours of someone reading shipping invoices aloud. One of them yawns so hard he almost dislocates his jaw. The others flinch. One of them crosses himself. Okay, maybe that last part was for dramatic effect, but you get the idea. The thing is, London wants to be lively. It dreams of Paris, of gaslit boulevards and sparkling conversation. But what it often ends up with is pea soup fog and people who say, indeed, as a full sentence. Entertainment is rationed. Newspapers avoid sex but delight in moral outrage. Theatergoers clap politely. Sermons stretch for days. Even dinner parties are designed to lull you into contemplative torpor. 10 courses, no seasoning, and exactly one permitted laugh every 45 minutes. And then there's the tea. Endless tea. Lukewarm, tannic, and almost aggressively unsatisfying. You drink cup after cup hoping for a spark, but it just deepens your yawns and stains your teeth. Historians still argue whether the culture was truly as dull as it seems in hindsight, or if we're just seeing the residue of its most uptight examples. Some insist London was vibrant under the surface, with secret clubs and underground performances. Others believe the average evening involved a great deal of wallpaper staring and quiet sobbing over boiled mutton. What's not debated is this: the public was desperate for stimulation. And when it didn't get it, something had to give. Sometimes, that thing was a yawn. You remember the phrase you overheard earlier. Lack of moral fiber. It echoes now as you walk past a row of townhouses, each with its perfectly symmetrical curtains, its brass letterbox polished within an inch of its life. The people inside are fighting off sleep with Victorian zeal, reading newspapers by candlelight, playing slow piano pieces, frowning very hard at wall art. And this yawning, this spreading, treacherous yawning, is starting to feel less like a reflex and more like a rebellion. It's your body's way of telling you, no more shipping invoices. No more grey meat. No more poems about daffodils. Please. You pass a group of children, their cheeks red from playing hoops and catching fog in their mouths. One of them yawns and immediately gets scolded by a governess. Mouth closed, Clara. You are not an animal. The child looks stricken, then chews the inside of her cheek in what might be quiet protest. That's the thing, even children aren't exempt. The Victorians are obsessed with discipline. Whole volumes are written on how to keep a child from slouching, sniffing, blinking too often, and, of course, yawning in public. Some etiquette guides recommend pinching your inner elbow if a yawn rises. Others suggest biting your tongue. A few just suggest prayer. Not to stop yawning, mind you, but to cleanse your soul after it happens. And the adults? They take it even further. You catch a snippet of conversation outside a tobacconist's. Caught him yawning during the vicar's sermon, didn't she? What did she do? Told him he'd go blind. Poor lad's only 9. Sure, they're probably exaggerating. But in this era, threats like that weren't uncommon. Victorian England specialized in linking physical behavior to eternal consequence. Bad posture would ruin your spine and your marriage prospects. Reading novels might make your womb wander. And a yawn? Well, that was a gateway gesture, to boredom, to disrespect, maybe even to sin. There's even a fringe medical theory, circulating in certain salons and published in more than one medical pamphlet, that yawning allows in devilish airs. That every time your mouth gapes in fatigue, you risk letting impure spirits enter. It's not mainstream science. But it's Victorian London. People still sell tonic water that glows in the dark. And in that climate, the humble yawn gets turned into a symbol. You round the corner into Covent Garden. Street performers pack up their gear. A violinist tunes a final sour note. The smell of roasted chestnuts hangs thick in the air. You spot a gentleman with a monocle and a mutton-chop beard sitting on a bench, dozing off upright. His mouth starts to open. He jerks awake, slaps his cheeks twice, and mutters, "Compose yourself, Bartholomew." You can't help it. You chuckle. But part of you understands. In a society so obsessed with control, bodily, moral, social, even the smallest lapse feels like defeat. A sneeze might be forgivable. A hiccup tolerated. But a yawn? A wide, slow gape that betrays your inner clock and broadcasts your boredom to the world? Scandalous. You start heading towards Soho. The fog is so thick now it seems to swallow sound. The city quiets to a hush, except for your footsteps and the occasional snort of a half-asleep carriage horse. You yawn again, deliberately this time. Why not? There's no one around. Except, maybe, a pair of eyes peeking from behind a velvet curtain. They catch you mid-yawn. The curtain closes faster than a mousetrap. You've just become the subject of gossip. It's ridiculous, right? But also kind of thrilling. A harmless act treated like subversion. A whisper of resistance in a world choking on rules. It's only a matter of time, you think, before someone does something truly unhinged about it. By morning, the frost has set in, painting the window panes in delicate spiderwebs of ice. You trudge through a crisp square in Kensington, collar turned up against the cold, trying not to look suspicious or drowsy. But there's no escaping it. You're tired. You're always tired. Everyone is. It's the Victorian condition. And yet you can't just yawn. Not here. Not now. Not when London is cracking down on the uncivilized gape. You step into a small bookshop smelling of must and ink, and there it is, stacked high in the front display. Manners for Modern Gentlefolk, 4th edition. You open to a random page and find a full paragraph on yawn concealment. When the urge arises, one must endeavor to resist. Should the yawn persist, a gentleman may turn his head, place his fist discreetly before his mouth, and by no means emit a sound. Audible yawns suggest an undisciplined mind and a contempt for company. You blink. Flip the page. There's more. A stern sidebar notes that yawning during conversation may result in social downgrade. Whatever that means. You imagine someone tearing a badge off your coat and saying, "I'm sorry, Nigel, but you're a level 4 now. No more parlor invites." This isn't just etiquette, it's moral architecture. Victorian society is built like a giant, overdecorated cake, layer upon layer of rules. And this little involuntary jaw spasm, is being iced over with guilt and fear. Outside, a group of young ladies exit a finishing school in a huddle of nervous laughter and painfully upright posture. Their instructor, a hawk-eyed woman with a hat like an overturned teacup, walks beside them, brandishing a parasol like a rapier. You hear her hiss, "Annabelle, I saw that. Contain yourself." Annabelle looks mortified. She had yawned. Barely. Victorian women, especially upper-class ones, are under pressure so intense it could power a locomotive. They're corseted, restricted, schooled in fan language and modest gesturing. If they laugh too loudly, it's scandalous. If they eat too heartily, it's vulgar. If they yawn, it's borderline criminal. Because to yawn in public, as a woman, is to suggest the world has failed to entertain you. And a bored woman, in 1865, is a dangerous thing. Historians still argue whether these etiquette manuals were widely followed or mostly aspirational, like today's fitness guides living on coffee tables, unopened. But it's clear that the pressure to perform propriety was real. There are diary entries, letters, and social columns all whispering the same fear: be dull correctly, or don't be seen at all. You visit a cafe on Piccadilly? Behind the counter, a flustered young server yawns and immediately stifles it with such violent urgency that he nearly drops a pot of boiling water. "Pardon me," he gasps to no one in particular. "Didn't sleep last night. Reading Plato." A lie, probably, but a culturally acceptable one. Because if you must yawn, Victorian etiquette books advise you to blame it on something lofty: late-night philosophy, spiritual turmoil, the weather. Never blame the company, the dinner, or the droning man talking about his bead collection. Across the room, a pair of dandies in brocade waistcoats discuss something called the Silent Society, a club of gentlemen who pride themselves on mastering complete public control. No sneezes, no coughs, no blinking too rapidly, and certainly no yawns. You watch them sip their tea with robotic precision, pinkies extended like antennae. One of them looks like he might yawn, but catches it just in time and sips instead. Victory. It's impressive. And also, slightly terrifying. Because when you reduce human behavior down to posture and breath control, you're not just managing manners. You're training people to police themselves. No constable required. Just a little voice in your head saying, "Don't open your mouth too wide, or they'll think you were raised in a stable." There's a fringe etiquette scholar, well, a self-proclaimed one, writing letters to the Times about the moral contagion of yawns. He argues that like any form of indiscipline, they spread faster in lower-class neighborhoods, and therefore must be addressed through public hygiene campaigns. It's equal parts absurd and revealing. Because the subtext is clear, yawns aren't just a bodily function, they're a class signal. And the middle class, terrified of being mistaken for anything lower, latches onto yawn repression with the fervor of people desperate to look more refined than they feel. You walk back outside, past a pair of children pretending to be lords and ladies. One curtsies. The other bows. Then one fakes a yawn, comically wide, and the other shrieks with laughter, until their nursemaid hisses and snaps. Do you want people to think you were born in the colonies? Oof. The irony, of course, is that trying not to yawn often makes it worse. The very act of resisting kicks your body into a weird tension loop. You become hyper-aware of your breath. Your throat tightens. Your brain fixates. Before you know it, you've yawned 3 times in a row and offended 6 duchesses just by standing near them. Back at your boarding house, you sit by the fire and glance through a pamphlet someone slipped under the door. The oral menace: is yawning the new plague? It's printed cheaply, but the tone is dead serious. The author warns of a societal unraveling if public yawning is not swiftly curtailed. From the schoolhouse to the opera box, we witness a decay in discipline, beginning at the mouth. What yawns today shall fester tomorrow. You half expect the paper to start screaming in blood-red ink. Instead, it ends with a list of suggested yawn vigilance strategies. Avoid all speechless pauses in public gatherings. Never read aloud in a monotone. Lulls invite gapes. If a yawn occurs within 5 feet of you, do not respond in kind. Clench your jaw and look away. You toss the pamphlet into the fire, watch it curl and blacken. But something about it sticks. The fear. The fragile balance. A society teetering between decorum and absurdity. It's a simple gesture, the yawn. But here, in this time, it's loaded with meaning. And tomorrow, that meaning's going to explode. The next morning, as grey drizzle settles over London like a particularly disappointed ant, you step out onto the pavement just in time to witness what will later be called, by those with a flair for melodrama, the Duchess incident. It begins innocently enough. You're across from St. James's Park, watching footmen attempt to depuddle the path with straw. A polished black carriage rolls to a creaking stop, and out steps Her Grace, the Duchess of Wensleydale, swaddled in violet taffeta and powdered just this side of ghostly. She's famous in society columns for her opinions on everything from embroidery stitch ethics to proper spaniel grooming. If the Victorians had Instagram, she'd be an influencer with a monthly hat partnership. She adjusts her gloves. Looks up at the sky as though offended by the clouds. Then it happens. A yawn. Long open. Audible. The kind of yawn that starts in your toes and ends in existential crisis. Her mouth opens like the gates of an ornamental hell, and for a split second, everything freezes. The footmen avert their eyes. A passing clergyman drops his umbrella. A woman faints, though frankly, she was teetering already. You, meanwhile, stare. Because you're not sure if you just saw a duchess perform the equivalent of public nudity. And then you hear it. A hiss from an onlooker. Disgraceful. The news spreads faster than cholera at a bake sale. By tea time, the London Mercury has a scandalous sketch of the moment, titled, "The Yawn Heard Round Belgravia." A gossip column speculates that the Duchess may be unwell, or worse, bored of her own privilege. One wit wonders aloud whether yawning in satin gloves is grounds for divorce. The Duchess herself says nothing, but her social calendar is mysteriously cleared for the next 6 weeks. You don't need to be a body language expert to understand what just happened. For one fleeting moment, the edifice of composure cracked. The woman who'd once hosted a 12-hour tea to raise funds for rescuing fallen parrots let slip the most human of flaws, fatigue. And in doing so, she made the whole house of cards tremble. That's the thing about Victorian decorum. It's an illusion of perfection held together with pearl clasps and pure fear. One misstep, one twitch, one improperly restrained bodily reflex, and it all goes out the window. Especially if you're a woman, and especially if you're high society. Historians still argue whether the Duchess incident actually sparked the larger anti-yawn hysteria, or if it merely gave shape to anxiety already bubbling under the corseted surface. Either way, within days, pamphlets begin circulating like illicit fan fiction. One reads, "If our nobility yawn, what hope have the poor?" Another, "Protect the streets, a citizen's guide to dignified facial stillness." And then, barely a week later, a strange little ad appears in the back of the Illustrated London News. "Join us, the Anti-Yawn League of Greater London." At first, people assume it's satire. Surely no one would organize around the idea of outlawing yawns. But Londoners love clubs. There's the Vegetarian Society, the Society for the Suppression of Mendacity, and at least one exclusive group for people who collect beetles and never speak. Why not an anti-yawn league? Within days, the league is holding meetings, first in a private room above a haberdashery, then in an actual lecture hall. The founding member, a Mr. Cedric Malthus Penwhistle, describes yawns as emblems of apathy and civic betrayal of the highest order. He wears tiny spectacles, a comb-over, and the perpetual look of someone who believes fun is a French invention. His speeches are excruciating. Ironically, people fight not to yawn while listening to them. Still, the league gains traction. Newspapers start covering it, skeptically at first. Then, less so. Articles appear with headlines like, "Can proper posture prevent pandemics of ennui?" and "Yawning, the silent epidemic." And just like that, the absurd begins to solidify. You attend one of their gatherings out of morbid curiosity. It's held in a dusty lecture hall with creaking floors and damp-stained ceilings. Men in wool suits nod solemnly while Penwhistle waves a chart showing peak yawning zones across the city. Apparently, Covent Garden and Hyde Park are hotbeds of open-mouthed disobedience. He suggests the formation of a volunteer, yawn guard, to observe, report, and gently reprimand offenders. There's even talk of developing a small personal device, like a cravat pin, that buzzes gently when the wearer's jaw begins to drop. A sort of shock collar for the tired elite. You look around. Half the audience is actively suppressing yawns. One man has tears streaming down his face from the effort. No one dares let go. You feel a quiet, ticklish urge in your own throat. You clench your teeth. Rub your eyes. Think about dead cats and math. It doesn't work. Your yawn escapes. 3 rows of monocles swivel toward you in silent condemnation. Someone gasps. Someone else writes something in a tiny notebook. You've committed the first yawn-based faux pas of your adult life. Later that evening, walking home under gas lamps and drizzle, you reflect on how quickly nonsense becomes dogma. One duchess, one spasm of unfiltered humanity, and suddenly the entire city is acting like open jaws lead directly to moral collapse. You pass a window where a family is having dinner. The father yawns. The mother slaps his arm with a napkin. The child watches, wide-eyed. And you wonder, what else have we learned to fear, just because someone, somewhere, once did it without permission? It begins with a whisper. A pamphlet here. A letter to the editor there. A sternly phrased circular tacked to the wall of a public library beside notices about lost dogs and spontaneous combustion, which, yes, Victorians were still vaguely worried about. Within a fortnight of the Duchess incident, the Anti-Yawn League transforms from a fringe curiosity into something larger. You hear about it first while buying a crumpet. The baker, a woman with flour permanently embedded in the creases of her apron, leans in and mutters, "Did you hear? They've opened a membership hall. Invitations only. No mouth breathers allowed." At first you laugh. Because of course you do. How could anyone take a club dedicated to eradicating yawning seriously? But by the end of the week, they've got stationery. Embossed. The Anti-Yawn League of Greater London, AYLGL, if you're into acronyms, has a motto. Decorum before breath. And a mission, to restore the moral backbone of the empire by eliminating visible signs of weariness, lethargy, and worst of all, boredom. They even publish a manifesto, equal parts terrifying and hilarious. From the dimmest workhouse to the highest House of Lords, let no man betray fatigue upon his features. Let each citizen meet the world with vigor, vigilance, and a tightly fastened jaw. It reads like a particularly stern bedtime story. If bedtime stories ended in guilt and jaw cramps. The League's founder, Cedric Malthus Penwhistle, remember him? Tiny spectacles, very damp soul, is joined by others. Miss Gertrude P. Figg, former governess and rumored inventor of the silent cough glove. Reverend Thomas Bellwether, a preacher who once claimed yawning was a silent scream from the devil's balcony. And Sir Walter Henniepot, whose title appears to have been inherited from a cousin who once shook hands with Queen Victoria's butler. They give lectures, write columns, host salons where people come to practice sitting perfectly still while pretending to enjoy stale sponge cake. You attend one such salon, and it's the driest event in human memory. Everyone is wide-eyed and terrified of blinking too slowly. Someone tries to start a discussion about poetry, but is shushed for creating an emotional lull. You sneak out midway through. It's either that or yawn so hard your hat falls off. The League begins posting signs in train stations and parks. You see one on the wall near the Bakerloo line. Feeling fatigued? Fix your posture, not your jaw. Another near Hyde Park. Resist the gape. Embrace the grace. There are even whispers that a few shop owners, especially the ones in posh districts like Mayfair, have quietly started refusing service to customers who appear sleepy. One man is reportedly denied a hat purchase because he yawned while browsing felt options. Another is asked to leave a cafe after being seen dozing near the marmalade rack. Historians still argue whether these accounts were exaggerated, satirical, or genuine moments of decorum run amok. Some point to the satirical Weekly Punch and its frequent mockery of social movements. Others believe at least some incidents were all too real, fueled by an elite determined to regulate behavior right down to the very breath. You stop one afternoon to read a newly posted League tract. A woman beside you whispers, "Don't believe it! They're all mad. It's just a yawn." Her voice is hushed, like she's speaking of forbidden rituals. Then she yawns. Grandly, defiantly, a full-on jawbreaker. And for a brief, beautiful moment, you see something glorious. A man across the street yawns back. A woman waiting for her omnibus lets out a stifled side-turn yawn. The driver himself, perched high on his coach, lets one fly like a battle cry. Contagion. Not of sin, but of humanity. You turn away smiling, only to see a League volunteer approaching in a stiff green sash. He holds a clipboard. He's writing names. Yawn names. Still, there's pushback. Not everyone agrees with the League's methods. Letters appear in the broadsheets signed only, "A very tired Londoner," or "Captain Sleepless of the 3:17 Express." One essayist writes an op-ed titled, "In Praise of the Yawn, a Defense of the Common Man's Jaw." It's a rousing defense of bodily honesty, arguing that if God didn't want us yawning, He wouldn't have invented such stretchable faces. One particularly bold barrister argues that public yawning falls under the category of nonverbal protest and should be protected as a civil liberty. He's laughed out of court. But his speech goes viral. Well, Victorian viral. Meaning it's reprinted in pamphlets and sung by newsboys in exaggerated accents. Meanwhile, the League doubles down. They launch something called the Yawn-Free Workplace Initiative. Employers are encouraged to report chronic yawners. Schools begin offering demerits for visible facial fatigue. And there's even talk of licensing public speakers based on their ability to retain audience ocular engagement. Translation: bore them, and the yawns are your fault. One teacher is reprimanded after a classroom inspection reveals that 6 out of her 12 pupils yawned during arithmetic. The headmaster suggests she read her lesson plans aloud to herself at home to find inherent droners. The Anti-Yawn League, for all its stuffiness, understands one thing perfectly: fear spreads faster than boredom. You walk through London now with a different awareness. Every suppressed yawn feels like a whispered confession. Every stifled stretch like a secret handshake. It's no longer just about tiredness, it's about surveillance. Social, moral, and eventually, institutional. Because when a society starts punishing fatigue, it's not long before it starts rewarding exhaustion disguised as effort. People begin bragging about how little sleep they've had. "Didn't close my eyes once last night," you hear a man boast on the omnibus. "Too many reports. Too much empire to manage." The woman beside him nods. "Same. I haven't yawned in 3 weeks." You don't know whether to be impressed or deeply, deeply alarmed. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet truth curls into place. The more they try to ban yawning, the more you want to do it. Not out of rebellion, exactly. Just release. Relief. Permission to be human in a city that's trying so very hard to pretend it isn't. You open your mouth. And yawn. Loudly. No one applauds. But 2 people smile. You're sitting on a stiff wooden bench at the Royal Society of Medicine, trying to look like you belong, which is hard when everyone around you has mustaches that could double as weaponry and is muttering about somatic irregularities, as if discussing the weather. The lecture hall smells faintly of ink, laudanum, and warm tweed. On the stage stands Dr. Silas Wendover, part physician, part crusader, part Victorian migraine in human form. He's mid-lecture, brow furrowed, voice pitched like a church bell trying to explain theoretical geometry to livestock. Tonight's subject: the physiology and peril of the yawn reflex. You can't make this up. He gestures to a large diagram of a human head, helpfully labeled with exaggerated arrows pointing to things like tongue root and gullet of sloth. The crowd leans forward, notebooks poised, eager to understand how yawning could possibly be more than a mechanical stretch. According to Wendover, it's not. Or maybe it is. The truth seems to depend on which page of his notes he glances at. He describes yawning as a cerebral trigger born of environmental deficit, claiming it occurs when the brain is understimulated and oxygen deprived. So far, so reasonable. Then he pivots. With the drama of a penny theater actor, he declares yawning a gateway gesture, a signal of psychic vulnerability, a bodily breach through which unwholesome ideation may seep. You glance at the man beside you, who scribbles, "Unwholesome seepage?" into his notebook with deeply earnest concern. Here's the problem. Victorian science is a strange soup of brilliance and baloney. The same century that gave us germ theory also suggested that migraines might be cured by wearing magnets on your spleen. And when it came to involuntary actions like yawning, scientists, physicians, and enterprising crackpots were all desperate to offer explanations, preferably with charts. Historians still argue whether these so-called medical lectures were driven more by social anxieties than actual research. What's certain is that they created a space where anyone with a coat and a chalkboard could reframe a yawn as anything from a nervous disorder to a sign of latent criminality. You start to notice the divide. Real doctors, the ones actually trying to understand human biology, describe yawning in terms of lung function, oxygen saturation, and neurofatigue. Cranks, who often hold honorary titles awarded by clubs with velvet drapes, blame everything from diet to spiritual emptiness to excess reading of French novels. It's the perfect storm of pseudoscience and patriarchy. One pamphlet you find, titled The Gape of the Mind, Studies in Female Languor, claims yawning is more frequent in unmarried women due to uterine sleepiness. You nearly choke on your tea. The author, a Dr. Algernon Sweeting, asserts that a woman's yawn is a cry from the lower organs, denied their divine function. Sweeting later goes on to patent a yawn-reducing corset, featuring a brass mouth hook and a diagram so unsettling it looks like medieval dentistry met haute couture. The corset never makes it to market, but the idea that yawning can and should be controlled medically catches fire. Soon, chemists begin offering anti-fatigue tonics, designed to suppress the urge. These range from herbal concoctions to pure alcohol and lavender syrup. One, sold under the name Viva Jaw, claims to tone the jaw muscles and realign moral compass. You try it once. It tastes like basil and regret. Some doctors argue yawning is a sign of too much blood in the brain and recommend mild bloodletting. Others think it's a result of poor alignment and promote neck-stretching contraptions involving leather straps and public humiliation. Then there are the spiritualists. Yes, the spiritualists. Madame Claribel Clink, famous for her seances and her unusually vocal ferret, publishes a small book titled Yawns as Soul Portals. According to her, each yawn is a moment when the body and spirit go slightly out of sync, allowing otherworldly influences to creep in. She warns of spectral hitchhikers, and claims that chronic yawners may have unknowingly adopted ghosts. You roll your eyes, but she draws crowds. And in a society terrified of hidden forces, foreign, supernatural, or female, her theories slip neatly into the cultural bloodstream. Even among the saner circles, the debate continues. Are yawns just low oxygen signals? Or emotional cues? Why do they spread so easily? Can animals catch them too? Actually, yes. Modern science confirms that dogs catch yawns from humans. In Victorian times, this led to all sorts of confusion. One reverend claims his dog's yawn was a sign of demonic possession. Another insists it shows animals share our sinful nature. A satirical cartoon in Punch features a pug yawning in church, being exorcised by an overly enthusiastic vicar with a mop. You start keeping track. In just 2 weeks, you've seen yawns blamed on spiritual weakness, poor upbringing, French poetry, anemia, the color mauve, and your personal favorite, telepathic disobedience of the lower jaw. Meanwhile, Cedric Penwhistle and the Anti-Yawn League embrace the scientific chaos. They host forums featuring the most hysterical experts, people who warn that yawning might lead to fainting spells, hysteria, and improper thoughts. At one event, a doctor warns of the 3-stage gape spiral. A single yawn repetition, moral erosion, and recitation of anti-empire sentiments. It's so ridiculous that someone in the back of the room actually laughs. They're escorted out by two men with clipboard mustaches. Still, the League continues to gain power by borrowing medical jargon they barely understand. People trust science, or what sounds like science, and the League uses this trust like a cudgel. And yet, despite all the charts and sermons, no one actually stops yawning. At a Sunday recital, you count 19 suppressed yawns in 20 minutes. At a public debate about the Irish question, the back half of the room is basically one extended silent yawn loop. At a wedding, the groom yawns so hard during the vows that the bride stares at him like he's just insulted her bonnet. Because the truth, the simple, inconvenient truth, is this: people get tired. People get bored. And no amount of corsets, charts, or league-backed lunacy is ever going to change that. As you walk home under the moonlight, a gentle fog curling around the street lamps like sleepy ghosts, you feel it rise in you again. That warm, slow pressure. That deep exhale. You let it out. And somewhere, Dr. Wendover shudders in his sleep, sensing a disturbance in the gape ether. The day begins with a corset and ends in collapse. You're helping a friend, let's call her Eleanor, lace herself into the latest bit of Victorian masochism, a new anti-languor bodice, praised in the Ladies' Companion for its breath-snatching refinement. It takes both of you and a shoehorn to get it closed. Eleanor wheezes heroically, then tries to sip tea without fainting. You, meanwhile, wonder how anyone managed to stay conscious long enough to develop an empire. Victorian fashion is exquisite. Also a mild form of asphyxiation. The bodice, along with its cousin the postural girdle, claims to reduce yawns by improving female moral structure through physical compression. In simpler terms, if you can't breathe, you can't yawn. Problem solved? Not really. Eleanor lasts about 23 minutes before excusing herself to the fainting couch, fanning wildly. You follow her with smelling salts and an expression that says, maybe deep breathing isn't the enemy after all. You begin to notice how everything in this society conspires against a good lungful of air. Houses are heated with coal and sealed tight against drafts. Parlors reek of gaslight, cologne, and guilt. The average indoor air quality rivals that of a burning haystack, and yet people blame the yawners for failing to maintain composure. Posture manuals recommend walking with your shoulders back and chin high, but doing so, while corseted and balancing a hat the size of a toddler, turns your lungs into decorative items. Historians still argue whether Victorian fashion deliberately stifled breathing or simply reflected a culture obsessed with physical restraint. Some believe the goal was to make women appear delicate, always on the verge of fainting. Others think the tight bodices were a literal armor against public scrutiny, like human gift wrapped with judgment-resistant lace. What's clear is that these constraints create the perfect environment for spontaneous yawning. Your brain, short on oxygen, rebels with a slow, gasping plea. Add the social demand to hide that plea, and you're one repressed exhale away from hysteria. Which, not coincidentally, is exactly what some doctors call it. In an 1867 lecture titled Fatigue Disorders in the Gentler Sex, one physician insists that frequent yawning in women is a sign of nervous melancholy, best treated with long walks, quiet embroidery, or, seriously, electroshock to the temples. He does not recommend loosening one's corset. That, apparently, is moral anarchy. You visit a ladies' luncheon, full of tight smiles and even tighter bodices. Between compliments on cucumber sandwiches, you watch a desperate battle unfold, teacups rising to half-covered mouths, eyes blinking furiously, tiny hand fans snapping open in choreographed panic. The yawns are winning. One woman excuses herself after letting slip a slight cough. The host doesn't blink, but you can see the social math being calculated behind her eyes. Then comes the kicker. One guest, bless her soul, drops her teacup mid-yawn and shouts, "OH, finally!" Like someone opening a jar after 3 hours of trying. The silence afterward is seismic. She's not invited again for a decade. Meanwhile, the League seizes the opportunity. They publish a new pamphlet. Corsetry and Composure, How proper posture prevents perilous gaping. It recommends bodices as tools for social discipline and cranial oxygen management. The logic is unclear, but the illustrations are divine. One features a woman ascending a staircase while a ribbon of air escapes a gaping servant girl behind her. The caption reads, "Don't be her." And yet, despite all this pressure, literally and figuratively, people yawn. They yawn in carriages, in classrooms, in courtrooms. They yawn in laundries, libraries, and lavish luncheons. And they yawn on trains. Oh, the trains. Because this is also the era of booming railway expansion, and for the first time, strangers are packed together in sealed compartments for long, jostling journeys with nothing to do but stare, twitch, and yes, yawn. The stuffy air, the rhythmic clacking, the polite silence? Perfect conditions for a contagion. You ride the 10:10 to Brighton and witness a full yawn epidemic. It starts with one elderly gentleman in a bowler hat. He tries to suppress it, but his mustache flutters in betrayal. The woman opposite him catches it. Then a child. Then a man reading Wuthering Heights who is clearly struggling with both plot and sleepiness. Within 5 minutes, the compartment has turned into a yawning orchestra. Silent but synchronized. One man tries to cough as cover. Another pretends to examine his pocket watch very closely. You give up and join in. It's strangely satisfying. And then, just as you relax, a young man beside you mutters, "Best be careful. They fine for that now." You turn startled. He grins. "Kidding. Mostly. Because while no one's been arrested yet, there are rumors. Reports of lead volunteers handing out warning slips at train stations. One lady claims her cousin was ejected from the first-class carriage for involuntary gaping during a speech about tariffs. Another says her brother was denied second helpings at a club dinner because of a visible yawn. These could be exaggerations, but in this climate, who knows? You spend the evening reading an etiquette journal that suggests silent nose-breathing exercises as a yawn substitute. It includes an illustration of a woman standing in a rigid pose by the fireplace, eyes wide, lips pressed, looking like she's awaiting a duel. The caption reads, "She feels the urge, but she resists." You close the book and mutter, "She also needs a nap." In your journal that night you write, Day 19. Everyone is yawning. No one admits it. Society teeters on the edge of collapse. My friend Eleanor is now wearing a corset that sounds like it growls when tightened. I fear for us all. Because here's the real kicker. The harder they try to control the body, the louder the body becomes. A sneeze can be stifled. A cough concealed. But a yawn? It will find its way out. Even if you cover it in lace and shame and call it morally unseemly. Even if you tie a ribbon around it and sell it in a bonnet shop. Even if you squeeze it beneath 15 bones of whalebone and a prayer. You board the omnibus at Charing Cross, jostled between a man reading the Times and a woman fanning herself like she's trapped in the world's most elegant oven. The bench creaks. The air smells of leather, sweat, and last night's mutton. As the driver cracks his whip, the carriage lurches forward, and the yawning begins almost immediately. Public transportation has changed everything. You see, in the years before the railways and omnibuses, most Londoners walked or rode in private carriages. You were usually among familiar faces, bound by some invisible code of shared decorum, or at least the shared understanding that no one would write about your facial expressions in the social column. But now, you're elbow to elbow with total strangers, jammed into enclosed spaces that seem engineered to suck out both comfort and dignity. The jostling, the heat, the endless stops. If the goal were to induce mass drowsiness, this would be a master class. And people are yawning. Constantly. At first politely, fists to mouths, eyes slightly narrowed in apology. But then more openly, with abandon. One man even yawns with a noise, which causes a woman across from him to flinch like he's unsheathed a sword. Public yawning used to be rare. Now, it's a commuter's reflex. And with the league lurking in the wings, everyone's a little paranoid. You overhear a muttered warning from a stiff-jawed man in a stiff-jawed hat. Watch your mouth, lad. This ain't Bloomsbury. The Anti-Yawn League's influence has begun extending to the rails and roads. They've taken to leaving small flyers on omnibus seats and train compartments, delicate, tasteful notes that read things like, "We are all observed. Why not be exemplary? Yawning is the enemy of alert citizenship. Would ye yawn at the Queen?" You think the last one is unfair. You might not, sure, but what if Her Majesty starts talking about naval reforms again? One flyer offers breathing advice. 3 shallow sips of air instead of 1 deep draught may preserve both posture and reputation. Another recommends counting backwards from 17 while holding your breath. A man across from you tries it. He turns pink. Public travel is already stressful enough. Add to that the looming threat of moral judgment over your jawline, and it's no wonder the whole city looks permanently tense. And yet, the anti-yawn enforcement on public transport isn't official. Not yet. Instead, it works through implication. Side eyes. Scoffs. Tiny pamphlets left in gloved hands like little shame grenades. One morning, you see a particularly dramatic incident on the Underground. A tired nurse, probably just off shift, yawns, openly, helplessly, while seated next to a cluster of well-dressed League sympathizers. A woman gasps. A man lifts his monocle, inspecting her like she's sprouted a horn. And then, out of nowhere, a prim, pale man in a cravat offers her a card. She reads it, frowns, and throws it to the ground. It reads, "Thank you for refraining from future oral disruptions. Respectfully, a friend of the League." You pick it up. Pocket it. Add it to your growing collection of yawn control propaganda. That's 3 this week. Historians still argue whether these little cards and pamphlets were part of a real coordinated movement, or just the overzealous work of a few committed eccentrics. Some claim there were actual lists, blacklists of known yawners who were quietly excluded from clubs and soirees. Others think that's pure urban legend, born from Victorian paranoia and a little gaslight poisoning. But what can't be denied is this: the fear is spreading. You take a ride on one of the new commuter trains to Reading. The trip is quiet, save for the rumble of wheels and the occasional throat clearing. You see a woman start to yawn, then pinch her nose sharply. A boy in the next car leans back, jaw stretching wide, only to be snapped at by a chaperone who hisses, "Control yourself, Bernard." The most heartbreaking? A man reading Great Expectations slowly closes the book, sighs, and then presses his lips together like a prisoner refusing to confess. You realize what's happening. We've trained ourselves to associate boredom with shame. Not just tiredness, not just a lapse in attention, but a personal failing. And the train, that great modern symbol of progress, has become a rolling chamber of performance. You're not just commuting. You're presenting. Awake. Alert. Morally fortified against the seductive pull of fatigue. And of course, it's all nonsense. Because there's no deeper sin to yawning than a simple truth: the human brain cannot be on all the time. Especially not after 7 stops and a lecture on naval budgeting. But you see people trying. You see it in their clenched jaws and furrowed brows, in the way they hold themselves so tightly they practically creak. It's not elegance. It's endurance. You disembark at King's Cross and pass a poster. Stay present. Stay proud. Stay ungaped. Next to it, someone has scribbled, "Stay home, then." You smile. That night, in a corner pub near the station, you meet a few conductors on break. One of them, red-cheeked and permanently windblown, tells you he's been ordered to keep an eye out for disorderly behavior, including yawning in first class. You laugh, but he doesn't. "They're not kidding," he says. "Saw a fella removed for napping. Didn't even yawn, just nodded off during that speechy fellow's monologue about grain tariffs." Apparently, that speechy fellow had friends in the League. You sip your ale in silence. Because it's happening. Not all at once, but gradually. Soft rules. Social enforcement. Lead-backed leaflets. And perhaps most absurdly, the idea that public transportation, the least glamorous space in all of England, must now be policed for signs of disinterest. You step out into the chill, the wind off the Thames threading through your coat. A yawn rises. You let it out. One man glances at you. Frowns. Looks away. Another nods. And for a brief moment, it feels like resistance. The opera house is packed. Lace gloves flutter, monocles gleam, and fans wave with the delicate aggression of peacocks on parade. You slide into your seat, spine already straightening out of sheer obligation. All around you, the glittering population of London's high society settles in for an evening of arias, overtures, and tight-lipped scrutiny. And you feel it almost immediately. Not the music. Not the excitement. The yawn. It creeps up your throat like an old friend with terrible timing. Tonight's performance is La Sonnambula, ironically, an opera about sleepwalking. As the soprano begins a slow, haunting passage, your eyes drift. So do everyone else's. You catch it, the unmistakable ripple of barely concealed jaw-stretching. Here, in the plush velvet cradle of Victorian culture, the yawn is public enemy number one. Theatre etiquette in London isn't just about clapping at the right times. It's a battlefield. And in this battlefield, a yawn is more than a reflex, it's a declaration. The League knows it. They've been targeting theatres for weeks. In the lobby, you'd passed a small placard. Elegance demands engagement. No yawns in the boxes. It was placed just beneath a portrait of Queen Victoria herself, who, it's worth noting, was famously impatient with long performances. Rumors swirled for years that Her Majesty once coughed pointedly during Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg and caused the entire orchestra to speed up. But the League, as ever, misses the nuance. For them, the opera house is sacred ground. The most public of public spaces. Which means it must be free of visible fatigue, even if the second act runs 2 hours, features 4 bass solos, and includes a lengthy interpretive dance involving someone dressed as a goose. Which it does, by the way. You watch as the performance drags into its third aria without a single sword fight. A man in front of you tries the old pinch your thigh until your eyes water trick. The woman beside you discreetly fans herself in a rhythm that might just be Morse code for "Save me." And then it happens. A yawn. Not from you, but from the lower balcony. Loud. Long, sincere. The yawn of a man who's just sat through 47 minutes of soprano vibrato and realized he has no idea what's happening. The audience freezes. Eyes swing toward him. The music continues, oblivious. You brace for drama, and it comes in the form of a hissed whisper from the next box over. Animal! A scandal erupts. The yawner is escorted out by a red-faced usher. The usher returns moments later, flushed and muttering about League complaints and decorum infractions. It's not an official rule, of course, but no one wants to risk becoming the next cartoon in Punch, especially not over something as humiliating as involuntary mouth movement. Historians still argue whether theaters actually adopted anti-yawn policies or whether the stories were League-fueled gossip campaigns. Some records show ushers were instructed to watch for disruptive behavior. Others suggest the entire moral panic was a performance in itself, a satire that got too real. But the fear was real. Theatergoers began prepping like soldiers before battle. Letters and etiquette magazines recommended techniques to stay alert and visually invested. Sipping lemon water between acts. Carrying smelling salts in one's pocket. Practicing jaw tightening during orchestral transitions. Counting decorative ceiling tiles to anchor the attention. You try them. None work. During intermission, the crush of bodies in the foyer is suffocating. People talk about the soprano, the set design, the weather. But underneath, a low thrum of anxiety. She yawned, you know. Someone whispers behind you. Lady Fortescue? Right in the middle of the love duet. No! She claims it was a sigh. The scandal is already half written in someone's diary. You order a cup of weak champagne and overhear 2 young gentlemen debating whether one should ever yawn in a private box if the curtains are drawn. It's still audible, one says gravely. And frankly, it devalues the tenor. Another, with a suspicious glint in his eye, says, My cousin claims she yawns with her mouth closed. Says it's more of a reverse breath. He demonstrates. It looks like he's trying to eat his own face. You return to your seat. The performance resumes. This time, the soprano plays dead for a full 3 minutes. You find yourself inching towards sleep, but you won't yawn. Not here. Not now. Instead, you scan the room. Look at the faces. Most are performing as much as the cast. Chins up. Brows lifted. Eyes narrowed in. Concentration. It's a communal dance of faked engagement, fueled by social terror and seasonal fatigue. You imagine a chorus line of League members marching in to confiscate violins and administer throat inspections. Someone in the back of the gallery gives in. A yawn. Faint, but visible. You catch it. Then a woman on the far right mirrors it. A chain begins. 4, 5, 6, like dominoes falling in the plush shadows. You feel it tug at you. And this time, you don't resist. You let the yawn rise, silent but full. You close your eyes. And it feels liberating. When the final curtain falls and applause erupts, you join in. Genuinely. Because while the performance was long, the crowd's effort to stay awake? That was a show in itself. As you exit, you pass a familiar green-sashed figure, League volunteer, clipboard in hand. He's jotting something. Maybe names. Maybe yawn counts. He eyes you. You smile. He does not smile back. Back on the street, a gentleman lights a cigarette and mutters. 3 hours. No swordplay. I deserve a medal. You yawn in agreement. It's Sunday morning. Cold, damp, and already cursed with the solemn clang of church bells. You shuffle towards St. Winifred's Anglican like a man headed for his own trial, and in a way, you are. Because this isn't just a sermon. It's the sermon. The one everyone dreads. The one that makes time crawl and minds wander and, worst of all, jaws stretch. The preacher today is none other than the Reverend Thomas Bellwether, the same Bellwether who's been publishing warnings in religious journals about the sin of spiritual slack jaw. Yes, really. You know you're in for something dreadful when even the title of his sermon is a threat. Drowsiness, the devil's draft. Inside the church, it's standing room only. Not because people are flocking to God, necessarily, but because Bellwether has a reputation. Not for warmth. Not for insight. But for endurance. His sermons regularly run 90 minutes, and the pews, built during the reign of Elizabeth I, seem specifically designed to punish spinal alignment. You slide into a seat near the back. The stained glass above filters cold light onto the congregation's strained faces. Everyone's wearing their Sunday best, tight collars, starchy skirts, judgmental expressions. No one dares slouch. And the sermon begins. Bellwether's voice is slow, deep, resonant, like a haunted grandfather clock with theological opinions. He opens with a parable. He continues with a digression about cartography. He pivots to the book of Leviticus, then, somehow, tax evasion. And 5 minutes in, you feel it. The itch behind the eyes. The warmth behind the jaw. The whisper of oxygen deficit. The urge. You fight it. So does everyone else. You watch as a man chews his own lip to stay alert. A woman flutters her hymnal like a fan. A small boy is poked sharply every time his eyelids droop. An elderly woman in the front row just lets hers rip. Silent, majestic, the yawn of a soul who's lived through 2 coronations and no longer cares. Bellwether pauses. Looks down. He's spotted her. He clears his throat. The air chills slightly. My friends, he intones, a yawn in God's house is not merely fatigue. It is surrender. It is apathy. It is the devil's lullaby. You sit up straighter. He continues, Satan does not enter with horns and fire. He enters with boredom. With the drooping head. With the parted lips. He whispers, sleep, child. Forget your soul. And you oblige him. You glance sideways at your pewmates. One man's eyes are so wide now he looks like he's watching a bear approach. Another woman crosses herself, which is impressive considering she's Anglican and her elbow is trapped under her husband's umbrella. Historians still argue whether preachers like Bellwether genuinely believed yawning was a sign of spiritual decay, or whether it was just a convenient way to scold congregants into better posture. Some claim his sermons were performance art, moral theater meant to frighten people into alertness. Others suggest he was just deeply insecure and took any yawn personally. Whatever the truth, he wasn't alone. Sermons across England began referencing spiritual lethargy. A handful of particularly fiery preachers warned of demonic torpor, a phrase that appears in no Bible, but plenty of handwritten flyers posted to chapel doors. One vicar in Devon reportedly handed out handkerchiefs with stitched warnings. "Cover thy yawn, lest ye be judged." You managed to make it through most of the sermon without slipping. But Bellwether, in a bold move, begins the second half with a reading from Deuteronomy and an interpretive side note about barley cultivation. Someone behind you groans. Then you see it. An usher. Moving slowly down the side aisle. Not collecting donations. Observing. His eyes scan the rows like a sleepy panther. You swear you see him write something down. You finally crack. It's soft. It's quiet. But the yawn escapes. You cover it with your hand, then your hymnal, then, why not, a prayer. Bellwether's eyes seem to lock with yours. You're not sure. Could be coincidence. But after the service, you're handed a small note. "May the Lord keep you vigilant." A friend in the pews. The fear isn't just about decorum anymore. It's moralized. Wrapped in scripture and whispered through sermons. Some churches begin offering yawning pew cushions, soaked in lavender to stimulate alertness. One parish experiments with music during readings to energize the flock. Another installs a small bell to be rung whenever a yawn is spotted, intended to wake the body and shame the soul. At a Methodist chapel in Hampstead, a preacher introduces what he calls sacred pacing. He walks slowly up and down the aisle as he preaches, maintaining eye contact with every congregant like an educational velociraptor. No one yawns there. They barely breathe. It all seems ludicrous. But it works. People become obsessed with looking attentive. Church hats get taller, straighter. Men invest in sermon posture braces. And behind every hymn, there's the quiet throb of self-surveillance. You sit with this irony. The sermon is about spiritual purity. But no one's actually hearing it. They're too busy trying not to open their mouths. On your way out, a child yawns loudly near the font. His mother gasps. Bellwether approaches. "Young man," he says solemnly, "you are already on the devil's threshold." The child, no more than 6, looks delighted. Later that evening, back at your boarding house, you reflect in your journal. "Today I was spiritually reprimanded for being human." The devil, apparently, has a thing for open mouths. If so, I hope he also enjoys dry sermons about barley. You sigh. Then you yawn. Not from evil. From exhaustion. Hyde Park is unusually still this morning, as if the trees themselves are holding their breath. The grass is soaked with last night's drizzle, the footpaths glisten, and the air smells faintly of wet wool and horse. You stroll along Rotten Row, pretending not to notice the tall, mustachioed constable standing near the ornamental bridge with an expression like he's waiting to catch someone loitering, or worse, exhaling with enthusiasm. You pass a man on a bench reading the Morning Chronicle. He stifles a yawn and glances nervously around. The constable twitches but stays put. Another woman walks by with her dog, lets out a sigh that dances on the edge of a yawn, and quickly covers her mouth with a lace-trimmed glove. This isn't paranoia. This is policy. Or at least, it's pretending to be. The buzz all over London this week is about a leaked internal memo, reportedly issued by the Metropolitan Police, concerning excessive oral gaping in public parks. The phrasing alone is enough to break a rib laughing. But behind the absurdity lies something a bit more chilling, a directive, real or fabricated, instructing beat constables to observe for patterns of slothful behavior, including unmasked yawns, prolonged sitting without engagement, and disruptive facial displays. It's unclear whether this is an actual operational order or simply the fever dream of one uptight commissioner with too much ink and too little oxygen. But the rumor spreads fast. By the time you hear it, it's already grown wings. They're ticketing people in Kensington Gardens. My cousin's friend was fined 5 shillings for yawning by the lake. You can't even open your mouth near a flower bed without a warning. Historians still argue over the authenticity of the memo. Some claim it was an elaborate hoax, possibly a prank by underpaid clerks with a flair for bureaucratic comedy. Others think it was genuine, part of a broader social campaign to tidy up London's public spaces and discourage aimless loitering. Code, of course, for poor people being visibly tired in nice places. Whatever the truth, the effect is real. The park is crawling with people trying very hard to look busy. Some pretend to be sketching. Others recite poetry to invisible friends. One man near the duck pond appears to be aggressively whittling a stick with no blade, possibly just to keep his jaw clenched. You take a seat beneath an elm and pretend to read a pamphlet titled Moral Discipline and Civic Strolls. It's one of those league-adjacent tracts, printed on thick cream paper with delicate black lettering and no joy whatsoever. The passage you land on reads, "The citizen must regard himself not as a leisure participant, but as a pillar of public order. A mouth agape is a mind adrift." You glance up. A couple nearby is quietly playing chess. The woman yawns, then catches herself mid-gape and turns it into a cough. The man winces but says nothing. They continue playing, expressionless, like two statues who accidentally learned how to move their arms. And then the constable makes his move. He strolls toward a young man slouched on a bench near the swan pond, his mouth wide open in an unmistakably luxurious yawn. The yawn of someone who hasn't read Moral Discipline and Civic Strolls. The constable clears his throat with the authority of someone whose boots have never scuffed mud. "Sir," he says, "may I inquire as to the nature of your display?" The young man blinks. "Pardon? That yawn. Were you aware it was visible from across the path?" You nearly fall off your bench. The young man, bless him, laughs. "Visible? Is that a crime now?" The constable doesn't flinch. "No. But it may be interpreted as improper. Indecorous. Perhaps public disturbance." A pause. The chess-playing couple pretends not to listen. A duck honks, as if in protest. The young man says nothing more. The constable writes something on a pad, rips it off, and hands him a slip of paper. You sneak a peek as he walks past. It reads, "Formal caution, visible fatigue in a communal environment. Should further offenses occur, consider relocating to a private setting." It's not a fine. Not an arrest. But it's a warning. You stay perfectly still. You fight every urge in your throat. And you realize, with a kind of creeping awe, that public parks, those rare green places meant for peace and repose, are now battlegrounds in the war against yawning. The League, of course, loves this development. In their latest pamphlet, they call Hyde Park a testing ground for moral vigilance. They propose designated composure wardens, trained in spotting what they call incipient yawns. There's even talk of a color-coded scarf system, green for alert, yellow for at risk, red for exhausted and socially negligent. A rumor emerges that the League is lobbying Parliament to make yawning in royal parks an offense of aesthetic disturbance. The phrase makes it into one tabloid, then another, and by the end of the week it's being debated in drawing rooms as if it were a legitimate proposal. You keep hearing the same phrase over and over. It's about standards. But whose standards? And who decides when being tired in a public place becomes a punishable offense? One woman, interviewed in the Ladies' Weekly Gazette, says, "If a man can't control his yawns, how can he control his debts, his morals, his household?" A stretch, certainly, but that's Victorian logic for you. Everything means something else. Everything is symbolic. And everything, somehow, always circles back to control. You leave the park just as it begins to drizzle. Behind you, a child yawns. His nanny claps her hands and says, "No, dear. Not outside." As if the air itself is watching. You cross into the street and glance back. The constable is still there. So is the duck. And as you yawn quietly into your coat collar, you think, we used to come here to breathe. Now we come to hold it in. The printing presses never sleep. Not in London. Especially not now. It begins with a cartoon, a clever little sketch in Punch that shows a portly member of the Anti-Yawn League, monocle popping, mid-yawn as he lectures a group of schoolchildren about mouth modesty. The caption reads, "Do as I say, not as I gape." It goes semi-viral overnight. In Victorian terms, that means everyone from chimney sweeps to duchesses is chuckling over it during breakfast, and at least 3 bootmakers have it pasted up beside their shop windows. Even the League's more uptight members can't fully ignore it. Some claim it's proof they're being noticed. Others insist satire is the last gasp of the morally weak. But it's not just cartoons anymore. The newspapers, hungry for copy and perpetually itching for a new absurdity to tear apart, start digging deeper into the so-called yawn crisis. The Penny Post runs a headline: London's Mouth War, the battle for the right to yawn. The article beneath it is equal parts factual reporting and gleeful mockery. It quotes an anonymous League member warning that public yawns might reduce the city's international standing. Then it follows that with 3 pages of reader-submitted yawn sightings, including one in the House of Lords and another on a butter salesman's donkey. The London Mercury gets involved next, publishing a 2-part exposé titled, "Is the Anti-Yawn League making us dumber?" It suggests, with restrained sarcasm, that suppressing yawns might be cutting off oxygen to the brain, and that perhaps the true enemy of empire is not the open mouth, but the closed mind. One editorial begins, "We begin to fear not the contagion of fatigue, but the fatigue of living in fear." And yet not all the press is skeptical. The Guardian of Decorum, a fussy weekly written in the tone of someone constantly straightening your collar, applauds the League's work. It runs etiquette columns with headlines like, "The Dignified Gaze, Training Your Face to Respect Society. 20 Ways to Mask a Yawn, Without Resorting to Continental Tricks." One column even suggests the invention of jaw shields, small, decorative devices to be worn over the mouth during moments of potential lapse. A cross between a face mask and a doily. Mercifully, the idea doesn't take off. But here's the twist: the more the press covers the League, the less seriously people take it. Or maybe, the more creatively they rebel. First come the letter writers. Missives flood newspaper offices, signed with aliases like "Yawner X Too Tired and Tooting," and "One Who Will Not Clench." Some argue for bodily freedom. Others simply confess to their favorite yawn spots, like it's a guilty pleasure. Hyde Park, the 3rd pew at St. Cuthbert's, the back row at amateur Shakespeare nights. Then come the poets. Yes, poets. London has never met a social scandal it couldn't turn into verse. Your favorite is a limerick that appears in the Evening Smile. A chap from West Croydon once said, "I yawned till they thought I was dead. But sir, I'm not rude. Just tired of your feud. Let my jaw be, or else off with your head." You commit it to memory. Satirical broadsheets flourish. One includes a crossword puzzle where all the clues are things you might do while suppressing a yawn. Hint: bite your tongue. Another features a mock advertisement. Tired of yawning? Just remove your entire lower face. Now available in 3 chastity-friendly styles. People laugh. Then they cough awkwardly. Because under the satire lies something real. Historians still debate whether the press was complicit in fanning the flames or diffusing them with ridicule. Some argue the anti-yawn movement was gaining real power, enough to influence civic policy, until the newspapers dragged it into the spotlight and left it to melt. Others claim the League wanted the coverage. That even mockery made them stronger. The truth? Probably both. You attend a public debate at a small theater in Soho. The topic: is yawning a crime or a cry for help? The panel includes a League representative, a theater critic, a sleep researcher, and a man wearing a papier-mâché yawn mask. The League rep begins with a predictable line: "Public fatigue is a symptom of national decay." The critic responds with, So is poor storytelling. And we don't arrest playwrights. Yet. The researcher presents actual data: oxygen levels, social mimicry, the natural rise and fall of alertness. The audience claps. Then the man in the yawn mask stands and simply yawns 5 times in a row. The crowd goes wild. From the back row, someone shouts, "Give that man a knighthood!" Afterward, the Soho Spectator runs the headline. Mouths wide open, minds wider still. But not everyone is amused. The League retaliates in print. In a full-page ad in the Telegraph, they declare, "This is not about comedy. This is about character. Let them laugh, but know they laugh as the ship sinks." You picture Penwhistle dictating this from behind a velvet curtain, monocle fogged with rage. And yet, the mood is shifting. People are no longer just annoyed, they're tired of being tired. Of pretending. Of being told how to hold their faces, their bodies, their boredom. At one point, someone leaks a list of League donors. Turns out, half of them are shareholders in companies that sell posture aids and tonic waters. Scandal. Or at least, mild embarrassment and several hasty retractions. You wander into a bookshop one foggy afternoon and spot a new chapbook on the counter. It's called The Yawner's Manifesto, and it opens with this line: "We open our mouths not in defiance, but in need. Let no man bind the lungs of another." You buy 5 copies. That night, over dinner, you tell your friends what the League is up to. You pass around the pamphlet. One woman lets out the most theatrical yawn you've ever heard and says, "I yawn, therefore I am." It catches on. By the end of the evening, the whole table is yawning in rhythm, slow, deliberate, almost musical. You laugh until you ache. And outside the window, the fog rolls in again. Not silent this time. The knock comes just after midnight. You open the door to find a man with a velvet waistcoat, ink-stained fingers, and a gleam in his eye that says he hasn't obeyed a single social norm in at least a fortnight. He doesn't introduce himself, just presses a card into your hand and whispers, "Midnight. Look for the candle in the second-floor window. Bring your own matchstick." He vanishes down the fog-wrapped street like a sleep-deprived phantom. You glance at the card. Embossed, of course. The Bohemian Society of Open-Mouthed Expression. Yawns, gasps, and sighs welcome. Membership, selectively tired. You chuckle, not entirely sure whether it's a prank or a code. But by morning, your curiosity has festered into resolve. You go. The address leads you to a narrow building nestled between a pawn shop and a milliner's that appears to only sell things in the shape of swans. The second floor glows faintly, candlelight flickering behind lace curtains. You knock. 3 times, as instructed. The door creaks open. Inside, velvet drapes, mismatched chairs, the heady scent of tobacco and peppermint tea. A chalkboard reads, "Tonight's theme, Yawner's protest, Yawner's poem." You've found it. The counter-movement. The resistance. Welcome to the pro-yawn cabarets. This is where the tired, the bored, the rebellious gather to celebrate the thing London is trying so hard to ban. You expected whispers. Maybe a few brave yawns. What you find is a full-blown performance. A woman in a glittering shawl takes the stage and belts out an opera parody titled, "Arias of Apnea." She punctuates each line with an exaggerated yawn, and is met with thunderous applause. Next, a man reads an original poem. To yawn is not to sleep, but stretch the soul from neck to nose to chest. The empire cringes at my mouth. I yawn, and let my breath go west. You're handed a mug of strong tea and a ribbon, blue, the unofficial color of the yawn movement. You sip, you watch, you stifle laughter, but not yawns, and for the first time in weeks, your jaw feels safe. Historians still debate whether these cabarets were spontaneous uprisings or elaborate art school pranks. Some suggest they were born in literary salons and spread like wildfire among the disaffected. Others think it all started with a group of theater students who were simply too tired to finish rehearsals. But they were real. And, in their way, they were effective. Because every cabaret became a tiny sanctuary. A place where people could gather and exhale, literally and metaphorically. where they could read anti-League sonnets, perform interpretive yawning, and challenge each other to hold their mouths open for as long as possible without blinking. One night, someone brings a marionette show. All the puppets yawn at once in a moment of glorious mutiny against their controlling strings. The audience gives a standing ovation. Another night, a woman from Oxford stands and reads a manifesto titled, "The Gape as Feminist Gesture." She argues that the expectation for women to hide their fatigue is rooted in a system designed to erase their discomfort. She ends her speech with a synchronized yawn, echoed by every woman in the room. By the time she sits, the applause is part reverence, part revolution. But this isn't just theater. The pro-yawn movement starts to spread. Quietly, like the thing it defends. Small cafes begin hosting silent sigh nights. Bookshops tuck little yawn-friendly signs in their windows. You see a brooch in the shape of a yawning cat on a woman's lapel. You spot a satirical magazine calling itself The Monthly Exhale. Word of mouth, fittingly, is how it grows. You meet a painter who adds tiny yawning figures into his landscapes. A seamstress who embroiders open mouths onto handkerchiefs. A choir that begins every rehearsal with a communal sigh. And slowly, yawning becomes art. At one particularly memorable cabaret, a man unveils an oil painting titled The Birth of a Yawn. It depicts a Greco-Roman goddess with her head tilted back, jaw stretched, surrounded by cherubs also mid-gape. The lead would faint. Here, it gets a standing ovation. You learn that cabarets are happening not just in Soho, but in Edinburgh, in Bristol, even in rural inns where coal miners gather to share stew and stories and sighs. One underground pamphlet shows a map marked with candle flames, each flame a confirmed yawn house. You begin to understand, the yawn has become a symbol. Of weariness, yes, but also of truth. Of being unwilling to perform alertness for the sake of someone else's comfort. One pamphlet reads, "We yawn not because we disrespect the world, but because the world so often disrespects rest." The League, of course, is furious. They publish a rebuttal called The Breach of Jaw, How Lethargy Threatens Civilization. It accuses the cabaret-goers of worshipping fatigue and encouraging the dissolution of industrious society. Penwhistle himself writes a column titled, "A Nation Can't Nap Its Way to Greatness." But the tone is strained now. The laughter has taken its toll. And the more the League yells, the more people smirk. You hear about a group of lawyers, barristers, mind you, who began yawning pointedly during League hearings. You hear about a schoolteacher who assigns a short story titled, "The Last Yawner," to her students, then watches with pride as they all yawn in unison at the final paragraph. You attend another cabaret, this one in the back room of a bakery. Tonight's theme is Yawn as Celebration. People recite tired love letters, sing lullabies, perform slow dances that begin with a stretch. You yawn, fully, openly, gloriously. No one glares. A man across the room tips his hat. Because this is no longer just about air and boredom. It's about permission. To rest. To breathe. To be a little undone in a world obsessed with polish. And somewhere out there, a League member writes a letter of concern. But in here? We yawn, and we smile. And we're finally, properly awake. It's a quiet Tuesday in the reading room of the British Museum, where silence isn't just expected, it's enforced with a kind of haughty reverence. You sit beneath the great domed ceiling, surrounded by scholars who look like they've been fossilized mid-thought. The air is thick with dust, reverence, and tension. You're here on a research mission. Not for ancient manuscripts. Not for Greek pottery. You're here to figure out whether the Anti-Yawn League is a joke. It's a question that started haunting your every stroll through London. After all these weeks, after the pamphlets, the sermons, the public scoldings, and the velvet-clad League volunteers, you begin to suspect what no one wants to say out loud. Was the whole thing satire? You dig through old issues of Punch, The Spectator, The Gentlewoman's Monthly Reprimand. You find plenty of jokes, yes, but also serious essays. Earnest letters from readers. Stern sermons printed in full. Some historians claim the League was born from a single joke in the Quiver, a well-known religious magazine, poking fun at public manners. Others argue it came out of the same circles that founded the Society for the Prevention of Unbuttoned Overcoats. A real thing, mind you, though possibly not serious. But just as many records, far more than you'd expect, suggest that at least some people believed it. You find a diary entry from 1868 in which a Lord Everham writes, "Attended League luncheon. Very fine veal pie. Lady D. warned me not to yawn during Bishop's toast. Managed to breathe through nose for 12 whole minutes. Felt faint. D. proud of me." Another entry in a school logbook records a boy being chastised for mouth laxity during morning recitations. That's real handwriting. Real ink. Not a joke. So which is it? Was the Anti-Yawn League a farce that got out of hand? Or a legitimate, if ludicrous, attempt to impose more rules on a society that already had entire books on how to hold a spoon? Historians still argue, vocally and in footnotes. One school of thought insists the League started as satire but was hijacked by the very people it mocked. Like a fake political party gaining real members. One satirist's parody becomes another zealot's platform. Others claim the League was always serious, but ridiculous in the same way many Victorian organizations were. After all, this is the same era that gave us the Society for the Prevention of Premature Burial, the Association for the Regulation of Women's Glove Sizes, the Brotherhood of Polite Umbrella Handling. Each absurd on the surface, until you remember how deep Victorian anxieties about order, appearance, and respectability really ran. You stumble on a flyer for a League symposium held in 1871. The theme? The Mouth as Moral Threshold. Keynote speaker, Cedric Penwhistle. Guest of honor, Reverend Bellwether. On the back is a sketch of an open mouth with a red X through it. Was it a parody? Maybe. But it's been catalogued as a serious entry in the museum's archive. The truth, you begin to suspect, is more complicated. And more Victorian. Because Victorians had a knack for blending sincerity and satire until no one could tell the difference. Think of it, a society that publishes etiquette manuals so detailed they diagram eyebrow positioning. That invents new forks just to avoid mixing up fish and meat. That sends teenagers to finishing schools to learn how to silently indicate distress with a teaspoon. Is it really that far-fetched that such a society could start earnestly warning against yawning, and then, when people laughed, double down? You attend a small lecture that evening, hosted at a private library. The topic is Fringe Movements and Moral Panic in Urban Settings. The speaker, a young academic with ink-smudged glasses, says something that sticks. Sometimes, the line between ridicule and reverence is only as thick as the public's appetite for control. She goes on to explain how Victorian London was a pressure cooker. Exploding population. Industrialization. Shifting gender roles. Expanding empire. No wonder people became obsessed with rules. The League, she argues, wasn't an outlier, it was inevitable. Think about it, she says. What better distraction from social collapse than a campaign against people being sleepy in public? You scribble it down. Because maybe that's the secret. Maybe it doesn't matter whether the League was satire or sincerity. What matters is that it worked. It changed behavior. It shamed people into silence. It put them on edge. It made them question their own impulses. And that, real or not, is power. Later, walking home past a row of flickering gas lamps, you find yourself imagining Penwhistle sitting in his drawing room, reading Punch, realizing he's become a caricature, and refusing to blink. Maybe he wanted to be mocked. Maybe he believed so deeply in restraint that ridicule only affirmed his mission. Or maybe he just hated the sound of yawns. You pass a bakery with a sign in the window. Yawners welcome. Come in and rest. And beneath it, a cartoon, Penwhistle mid-yawn. You smile. Because the League may have preached composure. But it sparked something better, conversation. Reflection. Resistance. Art. Laughter. And for every pamphlet they printed, a poem appeared. For every warning slip, a limerick. For every memo, a manifesto. You stop at a street vendor selling buttons and patches. One reads, "Ask me about my yawn." Another, "League free since '73. And your favorite?" "Open mouth. Open mind." You buy it. Pin it to your coat. And as you stroll back into the fog, you let out a slow, unhurried yawn. Not out of fatigue, but because you can. Parliament, in all its stiff-collared glory, is humming with something very close to absurdity. You arrive early, squeezing into a corner of the public gallery, the scent of wet wool and old ink thick in the air. Below, members of Parliament shuffle into their seats like actors in a morality play that's gone slightly off script. A few carry portfolios. A few carry walking sticks. All of them carry opinions. And on the docket today, nestled between proposed amendments to agricultural tariffs and a speech about road maintenance in Kent, is the bill. The one that's been whispered about in drawing rooms and printed half-mockingly in the margins of broadsheets. An act to regulate the display of public oral fatigue. It's not satire. Not anymore. You read the proposed language. No person shall, in any public venue or within sight of civic thoroughfare, allow the mouth to part for a duration greater than 2 seconds without clear purpose, such as nourishment, speech, or emergency. Breaches shall incur a fine not exceeding 20 shillings. The room buzzes like a parlor before a séance. Cedric Malthus Penwhistle is here, of course. He sits stiff-backed in the gallery opposite yours, lips pressed into a frown so tight it could reseal a jam jar. He nods along as the bill's sponsor, a young and tragically earnest MP from Essex, rises to make his case. "Mr. Speaker," the MP begins, "we face an epidemic of apathy. Our public squares, our carriages, our concert halls, all are plagued by displays of open-mouthed languor that undermine not only productivity, but dignity." He has charts. He has clippings. He even quotes Reverend Bellwether. "A slack-jawed city is a cinch-choke city." You stifle a laugh. But not everyone is amused. One elderly peer stands to support the motion, claiming he once saw a man yawn so wide near Westminster Bridge that a small bird flew in and never came out. The House erupts, half in horror, half in disbelief. Another MP, a ruddy-faced gentleman from Liverpool, counters with fire. "Sir," he bellows, "I would rather see 1,000 honest yawns than hear one more dishonest bleat about moral collapse. A yawn is not a crime, it is the body's sigh, the soul's semaphore. If we police the mouth, what next? Shall we find the twitch of a weary eye?" Applause. From the gallery, someone actually yells, "Hear, hear!" The speaker bangs his gavel. Order is restored. But the mood has shifted. One by one, members stand to mock the bill. A man from Glasgow reads a sonnet about his favorite park bench yawn. A woman from Brighton declares, "I shall now yawn in solidarity with my constituents." And she does, loudly, arms aloft like a patriot. The gallery breaks into giggles. Penwhistle turns purple. Historians still argue whether the entire debate was orchestrated as a farce, a theatrical finale to a saga that had already exhausted itself. Some suggest the bill was always intended to fail, its real purpose being symbolic, a last gasp, so to speak, of a movement losing air. Others insist Penwhistle and his allies truly believed this was their moment of triumph. A legal stamp on their campaign. A written acknowledgement that open mouths lead to open chaos. The vote is held. It fails. Spectacularly. Only 3 votes in favor. 2 of them accidental. Outside, a crowd waits. Some wear yawning cat pins. Others carry fans painted with open mouths. A group of students holds a banner that reads, "You can't find fatigue." When the results are announced, there's laughter. Cheers. A few actual yawns, exaggerated, celebratory, musical. Someone begins humming God Save the Queen in a slow, sleepy drawl. You catch sight of Penwhistle storming down the Parliament steps, chased by a newspaper boy waving the evening edition. The front page headline reads, "Mouths Unleashed, Commons yawns off bill in historic collapse." That night, London glows with something unfamiliar, relief. No more warning slips. No more fear of yawning in front of statues. No more green sash volunteers lurking near fountains with pamphlets that crinkled like threats. For the first time in months, the city breathes. You walk past a theater where tonight's performance is titled Yawn, the Musical. It promises a full 90 minutes of synchronized gaping, sleepy waltzes, and a dramatic finale in which the lead character yawns so powerfully he achieves enlightenment. At a bakery, you buy a pastry shaped like an open mouth. In Hyde Park, people gather on benches and yawn without shame. Someone plays the violin. Someone else naps sitting up. It is bliss. Even the newspapers soften. The Penny Post runs a final editorial. We thank the League for reminding us of one truth: the human body refuses to be shamed. And try as one might, no empire can conquer exhaustion. You write in your journal. The battle is over. The breath has won. Today, London exhaled. And somewhere, perhaps in a stuffy library or a dusty attic, Penwhistle rewrites his manifesto for the 15th time. But fewer people are reading now. Because they're finally resting. Because they're finally allowed. And now, dear listener, the lights are low. The cobblestones are quiet. The tea is finished. London has gone to bed, its yawns unpunished, its breath unmonitored. In the soft hush of gaslight fading, you can still feel the last tendrils of that long, peculiar chapter drifting away like fog on the Thames. There are no more warnings. No more fines. Just the gentle rhythm of lungs expanding, mouths opening, and people being gloriously, beautifully tired. You stretch your legs under the covers, the way someone might stretch in Hyde Park after a long walk. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your jaw relax. Let a yawn come, if it wants to. No one's watching. The streets are empty now, save for the last echo of footsteps and maybe a horse cart rattling home in the distance. The theaters are dark, the church is still, and even Parliament has gone to sleep, mouths open, heads tilted, dreams slowly unwinding. And you? You're safe. You're warm. You're allowed to rest. So close your eyes. Breathe deep. And let the world exhale with you.